Close your eyes for a moment. Picture this. It's 3 a.m. You hear scratching, slow, deliberate, coming from inside your walls. You tell yourself, it's rats. It has to be rats. But then your bed starts shaking. Your blankets are torn away by hands you cannot see. And when you look down at your chest, words are appearing in your skin, carved by invisible claws, bleeding and burning, HLL. Now open your eyes, because what I just described wasn't a nightmare. It wasn't a movie. It happened to a real child in 1949, and what followed was so horrifying that the Catholic Church tried to keep it secret for decades. Welcome back to the channel. Today, we are diving into the Shinjitsu, the absolute truth behind one of the most terrifying films ever made, The Exorcist. And I promise you, by the end of this video, you'll never look at that movie the same way again. Because the reality, it's so much worse. Forget everything you think you know. Forget Regan MacNeil. Forget the spinning heads and pea soup. The real story doesn't start with a girl at all. It starts with a boy, 14 years old, living in Cottage City, Maryland. Just outside Washington, D.C., his real name has never been publicly confirmed. To protect his identity, he's been given the pseudonym Roland Doe or Robbie Mannheim. Imagine being so traumatized by what happened to you that 75 years later, your true identity remains one of the most closely guarded secrets in modern history. Roland was, by all accounts, ordinary. An only child, quiet, studious, the kind of kid who did his homework and didn't cause trouble. He had a normal family, a normal house, a normal life, until January 1949, when his Aunt Harriet died. Now here's where things get strange. Aunt Harriet wasn't just any relative, she was a spiritualist. She believed in communicating with the dead, and she had introduced young Roland to a tool that would become his doorway to hell, the Ouija board. After her death, Roland was devastated. In his grief, he did what seemed natural. He tried to contact her. Night after night, he sat with that board, fingers on the planchette, asking, "Aunt Harriet, are you there? Can you hear me?" Something answered, but it wasn't Aunt Harriet. It started small, almost missable. The family began hearing noises at night, a rhythmic scratching sound coming from the walls. Scratch, 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 like something with claws was trying to get in, or trying to get out. Roland's father assumed it was rats. He called an exterminator. The exterminator came, inspected every inch of the house, tore open walls, checked the attic, the basement, everywhere. He found nothing. No rats, no mice, no insects, no explanation, but the scratching continued, and it got louder. Then things started moving. A picture of Jesus hanging on the wall would suddenly shake violently, as if earthquake tremors were running through it, but nothing else in the house moved. Furniture would slide across the floor on its own. Chairs would tip over when no one was near them. And all of this, every single incident, happened when Roland was in the room. His parents watched in growing horror as their home became a house of chaos. But they were practical, religious people. They didn't want to believe in ghosts or demons. There had to be a rational explanation. There had to be until the night Roland's bed started shaking. Picture this scene. You're Roland's mother. It's the middle of the night. You hear your son screaming. You run to his room, throw open the door, and what you see makes your blood turn to ice. Your son is in his bed, which is vibrating so violently it's moving across the floor. His blankets are being ripped off him by invisible hands. And as you watch, frozen in the doorway, red marks begin appearing on your son's skin. Not bruises, scratches. Long, deep scratches forming in front of your eyes, drawn by claws that don't exist. And they're not random. They're forming letters, words, messages. This happened. Multiple witnesses confirmed it. This isn't folklore or legend passed down through generations. This happened in 1949 in suburban America to a real family with a real child. The scratching sounds grew worse. They seemed to emanate from directly beneath Roland's bed, as if something was trapped under there, trying to claw its way up. Sometimes the sounds would follow him from room to room. Scratch, scratch, scratch. Roland's behavior changed. The quiet, studious boy became violent and vulgar. He would suddenly speak in voices that weren't his own, deep, guttural, adult voices that came from his 14-year-old throat. He would curse at his parents, using words they'd never heard him say, using blasphemies they didn't even know he knew. His parents did what any parents would do. In 1949, they took him to doctors. Multiple doctors, psychiatrists, medical professionals examined the boy extensively. They witnessed the phenomena themselves, the scratches appearing, the strange voices, the violent mood swings. Every doctor came to the same conclusion. There was no medical explanation. This wasn't mental illness. This wasn't a disturbed child acting out. This was something else, something they couldn't name. The family was Lutheran, deeply religious. With science failing them, they turned to their church. Their minister came to the house, witnessed the events, and was so disturbed by what he saw that he did something remarkable. He told them to go to the Catholics. The Lutheran minister knew that the Catholic Church had maintained formal rituals for exorcism for centuries. It wasn't something Protestant churches dealt with regularly. So the family found themselves at St. James Catholic Church, speaking to Father Albert Hughes. Father Hughes was skeptical at first. The church doesn't jump to conclusions about possession. They require extensive documentation, multiple witnesses, an elimination of every possible natural explanation. But after visiting the family and witnessing the phenomena himself, Father Hughes became convinced. He went to the Archbishop of Washington, D.C. and requested permission to perform an exorcism. Permission was granted. And so, on a cold night in March 1949, Father Hughes prepared to do battle with whatever had taken hold of Roland Doe. The location chosen was Georgetown University Hospital. Roland was brought in and restrained on a bed, thick leather straps across his chest, wrists, and ankles. Father Hughes entered the room carrying his ritual book, holy water, and a crucifix. He began to pray. What happened next would haunt everyone present for the rest of their lives. The moment Father Hughes began the rite of exorcism, Roland's body went rigid. His eyes rolled back in his head, and then he began to convulse with such violence that the bed shook. He pulled at his restraints with superhuman strength. One of the straps broke. Before anyone could react, Roland's hand shot to the mattress beneath him. He tore into it, ripped out a metal spring, and slashed it across Father Hughes's arm. The wound was deep and terrible. Blood poured from the priest's arm. He would require over 100 stitches. The exorcism was immediately halted. Roland was sedated and sent home. The first battle had been lost. and the entity, whatever it was, had won. Desperate and terrified, the family made a drastic decision. They would leave Maryland. They would go to St. Louis, Missouri, where they had relatives. Maybe distance would help. Maybe this thing, whatever it was tied to the house. They were wrong. The moment they arrived in St. Louis, the phenomena began again. Worse than before. The scratching sounds followed them. Objects flew through the air in front of their horrified relatives. Roland's behavior became increasingly violent and bizarre. His cousin, a student at St. Louis University, went to one of his Jesuit professors, Father Raymond Bishop, and begged for help. Father Bishop, along with his colleague Father William S. Bowden, agreed to investigate. What they witnessed changed them forever. They saw Roland sitting in a rocking chair that began spinning on its own. Faster and faster, like an invisible hand was pushing it. A heavy wooden bookshelf suddenly toppled over with no one near it. Objects flew across the room, books, picture frames, a lamp that smashed against the wall. But the worst part was Roland himself. His voice changed mid-sentence, dropping to a deep, adult growl. He spoke in languages he'd never studied. His body contorted into positions that shouldn't have been physically possible. And on his chest, in raised red welts that appeared before their eyes, the word hell was written by invisible fingers. Father Bowden knew immediately what he was dealing with. This was no mental illness. This was no fraud. This was genuine demonic possession. He contacted Archbishop Joseph Ritter and requested permission to perform a full, formal exorcism. The Archbishop, after reviewing the evidence, granted permission. What followed would become the most documented case of exorcism in modern history. The exorcism of Roland Doe lasted for weeks, over 20 separate sessions. Father Bowden led the ritual, assisted by Father Walter Halloran and other Jesuit priests, and they kept a detailed diary of everything that happened. That diary still exists, and what's written in it is absolutely terrifying. During the sessions, Roland would speak in perfect Latina language he had never studied. He would describe personal, intimate details about the priests' lives that he had no way of knowing. He would react with violent rage to any religious object. Holy water burned his skin. A crucifix in his presence would make him scream and thrash. Red scratches and welts would appear all over his body during the rituals. Sometimes they formed words: evil, hell, spite. Sometimes they formed symbols, inverted crosses, things the priests couldn't identify. His bed would shake so violently during sessions that witnesses described it as levitating several inches off the ground. His voice would change between multiple distinct personalities, some claiming to be demons, others claiming to be suffering souls from hell at one point. The word Louis appeared carved into his ribs. The priests initially thought it was a message telling them to go to St. Louis, but they were already there. They eventually concluded it might have been a trick, a deception by the entity to confuse them. The battle raged on. Night after night, the priests would return, would pray, would command the entity to leave in the name of God, and night after night, it refused. Then came the night everything changed. It was during a session at a relative's house. The priests were exhausted. They'd been doing this for weeks with no progress. Roland was strapped to a bed, thrashing and cursing. Father Bowden was reading from the ritual, his voice hoarse from hours of prayer, and then Roland went completely still. The sudden silence was more terrifying than the chaos had been. The priest stopped, uncertain. And then Roland spoke, but it wasn't Roland's voice. It wasn't the demon's voice either. It was something else. Something clear and powerful. The voice identified itself as the Archangel Michael, according to the diary. The voice said that Satan would be forced to reveal his name, a critical requirement in the rite of exorcism. The demon must be commanded to identify itself. What happened next was witnessed by everyone in the room. Roland's body began convulsing more violently than it ever had before. And then a voice, horrible, ancient, filled with rage, screamed out a name. The demon had been forced to identify itself. And then Roland's body, or the voice speaking through it, shouted, "I am Saint Michael. I command you, Satan, to leave this body now, in the name of Dominus, immediately." Now, the boy's body went into a final, catastrophic spasm. His back arched off the bed. Every muscle in his body tensed at once. And then a sound. Multiple witnesses described it as like a sonic boom, a crack of thunder that seemed to come from inside the room itself. The walls shook. The air pressure changed. Something broke, something fundamental, like reality itself had torn and then snapped back into place. And then Roland collapsed, still, silent, breathing normally for the first time in months. When Roland opened his eyes, he was confused. He looked at the priests surrounding his bed and asked what had happened. He had no memory of the possession, no memory of the exorcisms, no memory of the past months at all. It was as if he'd been asleep, trapped inside his own body, while something else piloted it. And now, suddenly, he was back. The scratching sounds stopped. The objects stopped moving. The marks stopped appearing on his skin. Whatever had possessed Roland Doe was gone. He recovered quickly. He returned to school. He grew up. He got married, had children, lived a completely normal, unremarkable life. He never experienced any paranormal phenomena ever again, and he never spoke publicly about what happened to him. To this day, his true identity remains unknown. He's now in his late 80s or early 90s, assuming he's still alive, and he has maintained his silence for 75 years. Can you imagine? Can you imagine going through something so horrific, so traumatic, that you spend the rest of your entire life hiding from it, never speaking about it, never acknowledging it, living under a pseudonym so that no one ever finds out who you really are? That's the reality of Roland Doe. In 1950, a young student at Georgetown University named William Peter Blatty read a newspaper article about the case. It fascinated him. He kept the clipping for 20 years. In 1971, he published a novel called The Exorcist. It was based on Roland Doe's story, but Blatty made changes. He changed the possessed person from a 14-year-old boy to a 12-year-old girl named Regan MacNeil. He added dramatic elements for effect: the head spinning, the spider walk down the stairs, the projectile vomiting. But the core of the story, the scratches appearing on skin, the speaking in unknown languages, the violent reactions to holy objects, the levitation, the multiple failed exorcisms, all of that came directly from the documented case of Roland Doe. In 1973, the film was released. It became a cultural phenomenon. People fainted in theaters. Some claimed to be cursed after watching it. The film itself became surrounded by legends of strange accidents and deaths during production. But here's what's truly chilling. Everything that terrified audiences in that movie, everything that made them scream and cover their eyes, was tame compared to what actually happened. The movie gave you jump scares and special effects. The reality gave a 14-year-old boy months of torture, gave priests trauma they carried for the rest of their lives, and gave a family scars that never fully healed. So what's the truth? What really happened to Roland Doe? Skeptics have offered explanations over the years. Maybe Roland was severely mentally ill, schizophrenia, Tourette's syndrome, or another disorder that manifested in bizarre behavior. Maybe it was sexual abuse expressing itself through psychotic episodes. Maybe he was a disturbed child from a strict religious household, acting out in the only way that would get attention. Some suggest the priests were caught up in religious fervor, that they exaggerated their accounts or fell victim to suggestion and shared delusion. Maybe what they documented wasn't demonic possession, but collective hysteria. Folia plus years, where multiple people convince each other that something impossible is real. These are reasonable theories. They make logical sense. They allow us to sleep at night, but they don't explain everything. They don't explain how multiple credible doctors, family members, hospital staff all reported seeing the same impossible things. They don't explain the detailed diary kept by Father Baudouin, which reads like a medical chart in its precision and objectivity. They don't explain how a 14-year-old boy could speak fluent Latin, a language he'd never studied. They don't explain the scratches that appeared on his skin in front of witnesses, carved by nothing visible. Most importantly, they don't explain why Roland Doe himself has remained silent for 3/4 of a century. If it was all fraught or mental illness, wouldn't he have spoken up by now? Wouldn't he have set the record straight? Wouldn't he have sued the Catholic Church, or written a tell-all book, or at least given one interview? His silence is perhaps the most telling piece of evidence. Something happened to that boy. Something so traumatic that he's never been willing to revisit it. Not even anonymously, not even for money, not even to correct the record. What could be so terrible that you'd rather let the world believe you were possessed by a demon than tell them what actually happened? The case of Roland Doe remains one of the most disturbing documented encounters with the unexplained in modern history. Whether you believe it was demonic possession, mental illness, fraud, or something else entirely, one fact remains undeniable. Something happened in that house in Maryland and that house in St. Louis in 1949. Something that terrified everyone who witnessed it. Something that launched 1,000 nightmares and inspired the most frightening film ever made. The Exorcist showed us fiction, but fiction is safe. Fiction ends when the credits roll. You can turn off the TV, turn on the lights, and remind yourself it's not real. Roland Doe couldn't do that. For him, there was no escape, no closing the book, no walking out of the theater. He lived through something that Hollywood spent millions of dollars trying to recreate, and they still couldn't capture the true horror of it. So the next time you watch The Exorcist, remember, you're not watching a horror movie. You're watching a watered-down, dramatized version of something that actually happened. To a real child, in living memory and somewhere out there, if he's still alive, Roland Doe carries those memories still. Every day, every night, forever marked by something that we can't explain, can't understand, and perhaps we're never meant to comprehend. Sleep well tonight, and maybe keep the lights on.